Tonight, the Duke.
Many agree that Duke Ellington is Washington, D.C. This is where he was born as Edward Kennedy Ellington and where his career began. As a composer and band leader, he brought jazz to the world. During the Cold War in the 1960s and 70s, he was one of the numerous American jazz artists who traveled to Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and Latin America. In 1969, President Richard Nixon presented Duke Ellington with the Medal of Freedom. In his 50-year career, Ellington also received the Pulitzer Prize and 13 Grammy Awards. Today, Mercedes Ellington, Duke Ellington's granddaughter, keeps her grandfather's legacy alive as president of the Duke Ellington Center for the Arts.
The music of Duke Ellington is of such a structure that it crosses generations and it makes puts everybody on an even scale. Duke Ellington used to be very charming and very gracious and appreciated his career to such an extent that when he was invited to play in different countries especially, he would compose a suite dedicated to that country. He loved to go to places he was not supposed to go. So he never labeled his music. It was not jazz, it was not this, it was just, he said it was American music.
Duke Ellington tore down racial barriers, playing to both African American and white audiences, a rarity during those racially divided times.
I'm just proving that the commonality between people is one of the things that I think that Ellington wanted to accentuate. He was always on the path of acknowledging what was really happening in the world, but the ideal of people being drawn together through music was his goal. And he was constantly writing. Every day he wrote. He wrote every day, even when he was ill, dying in the hospital. There was music paper. He had music paper. He had a piano at the foot of the bed.
Mercedes Ellington remembers rare moments spent with her grandfather.
We never saw him really because the orchestra was constantly on tour. The only time that we would see them is when they came to New York. They would play at the Apollo, they would play the Rainbow Room. And so we had these intimate family gatherings backstage in the dressing rooms.
As a young boy, Duke Ellington was more interested in baseball than in piano lessons. But at that time, people respected and admired musicians.
The ladies were drawn to the piano players and the musicians. And so as his interest in the ladies increased, so did his interest in music. So he was driven by music and by women.
Duke Ellington started playing the piano at the age of 7, and by the time he was 15, he was already composing. Mercedes Ellington says her grandfather was not really a grandfatherly type. He did not want people to know his age.
I think he was vain enough that he didn't want, like all of his lady friends, and certainly some of his fans, to know that he was old enough to have grandchildren. So he asked me to call him Uncle Edward.
Mercedes traveled with the band to Russia in the mid-1970s and got to see her grandfather's popularity firsthand.
People were running on the tarmac alongside the plane as we landed with bouquets of flowers, and they had been listening to the music of Duke Ellington through Radio Free America. There were enough Russian people who knew about the music and had secret recordings of the Ellington band, so there was great reception everywhere we went.
The musical revival, Sophisticated Ladies, based on Duke Ellington's music, has just opened at the historic Lincoln Theatre in Washington, D.C., where Ellington used to perform. The original Broadway production from 1981 was nominated for 8 Tony Awards and won 2. Sophisticated Ladies stars famous Broadway choreographer and dancer Maurice Hines. Since Mercedes Ellington is herself a professional choreographer, she's the artistic consultant for this performance, which celebrates life and work of her grandfather.
He lived to work, and so when he traveled and toured, that was when he was in heaven.
Duke Ellington wrote more than 3,000 compositions during his career. After his death in 1974, his son Mercer Ellington, Mercedes's father, took over the orchestra. The Duke Ellington legacy continues to live and will endure for generations to come. Amra Alirejsovic, VA News, Washington.